Hey, I'm Tom Bradford. Welcome to Lessons in Leadership. This is episode 2. Today, I'm going to talk about team composition and how we're not doing product managers any favors in the way that we compose teams. So, just to start off, let's talk about composition because I think we need a baseline for the conversation. Composition, if you're a software engineer, you'll probably appreciate this analogy, and the analogy would be this. When you compose classes, object-oriented, you're composing them of units or constituent parts that have some different function. They do different things. You wouldn't need to compose a class if that weren't the case. You could create new instances of the class if you needed a bunch of things doing exactly the same thing. And when we form teams, we're trying to accomplish the same thing. So, the thing about team composition is that if you're trying to deliver just-in-time value, meaning creating vertical slices of customer value that you ship very frequently so that you can gather feedback from customers, then you actually do need all of the functions within the team that are actually necessary to deliver that value, right? We assume that this is the case. Not everybody does, but we mostly assume that this is a necessary way of delivering software. That means that you'll have QA, you'll have software engineers, front end, back end, probably mobile, depending on what kind of product you're shipping. You'll need product managers. You'll need designers, depending on whether or not you're actually performing any kind of user-facing design. And usually you will be, right? So once you have all of those people together doing that specific function, you've got all of the constituent parts to be able to deliver increments to customers. But that's not everything, because competency generally doesn't just sort of narrow itself into the area of technical skills. Teams need to work with other teams. They need to work with stakeholders. That means that your ability to technically drive concerns forward is not the only thing that you need to be able to do as a software developer, as a product manager, as anybody in a company. So we're looking for competencies beyond just technical skills. I've borrowed a framework from Circle CI. It's actually an excellent framework, and I don't implement it. It's just sort of a mental model for me when I think about the competencies of teams. And it breaks down like this. You have sort of 5 main areas of competencies. They are your technical skills. Am I really good at coding, and just cranking out lines of code and building a piece of software? That's a given, right? Generally speaking, a software developer is hired to solve problems, usually by producing code, but only if necessary, right? Because obviously every line of code is potentially a liability for a company. And so the more senior software developers are trying to be economic in the decisions that they make about how much code that they actually produce. Better to produce no code and solve a problem with zero friction and high impact than to produce a lot of code that potentially needs to be maintained over a long period of time and has the potential of being buggy and a risk to the company. Important, right? Next would be your ability to deliver, as the point of view from the point of view of competencies. So your ability to deliver is your ability to take a large problem, break it down into smaller problems, and then based on those smaller problems, produce good estimates of how long it will actually take, how much work is involved, the complexity of it, taking that complexity and simplifying it, and then driving it forward so that all of the parts of the company can come together and that they're aligned with each other. This is an important attribute of software development. Not a lot of software developers are really good at it. We're notoriously bad at it. So, for example, as a manager, I will usually hear an estimate and multiply it by 3 as a starting point when it comes to less mature teams. More mature teams, I start to actually trust them. But that's something that we have to get good at over time. It's a skill, just like programming. Next, communication. Our ability to actually effectively communicate with people, to take technical topics and simplify them in a way where the language that we use is actually comprehensible to the audience that we're presenting toward. Just generally communicating, being able to actively listen, being able to accept feedback and give feedback in healthy and constructive ways. This is a really important skill. And I can guarantee you I was not always good at it. And for sure, I still have to work at it every single day. Next would be your leadership abilities. And that means sort of taking the point on things. I mean, for example, in the context of a team, a topic comes up. You say, hey, you know what? I would really love to drive this forward. I will make sure that it happens. And you sort of facilitate and you get everybody aligned on actually getting that stuff done. We do not expect managers to be the ones to always have to do that. In fact, I would love to see everybody on a team at one point or another taking the lead on something, because again, it is a skill and it is highly valuable to a team. And finally is business acumen. Now, business acumen is understanding the company, what it does, how it makes money, understanding its customers and stakeholders, and finally, really, really understanding the general market that you're working in so that you understand competitively how you can create advantage for the company within that space. Again, that's a skill. It takes time to develop. I didn't care about it at all when I was a young software developer. I care about it a lot now. I think it's really important, and it might be because I've worked at so many companies that have either been on the verge of or completely failed, including my own. And that is for not having enough business acumen to really understand how you're creating value for customers and doing it in a sustainable way for the company. Super important competency, and we should expect it in every single team. Now, those competencies, we can't expect an individual to sort of encompass all of them equally well. It's impossible. That person would be a unicorn. They exist. They're so few and far between that to try to find one would not be effective. It's very time prohibitive. It's costly. And instead, what you can do, and it's much cheaper and it's faster, is to compose teams where you're evening out those competencies across the team. That's actually easy to do, but you have to be deliberate when you do it. Now, why don't we expect that? Well, because again, it's impossible, but also it may not be necessary to have all those skills. Kent Beck, who you might know, he talked about something called paint drip people a few years back. I can't remember how long it was, maybe five or 6 years ago. And what he was essentially saying is that our previous understanding of I-shaped or T-shaped people is something we should throw away. And if you don't know what an I-shaped person is somebody who is a specialist in one thing only, and absolutely nothing else. A T-shaped person takes that idea of specialization and it broadens it. It basically says, yes, I am a specialist in this, say Go programming, but I also sort of minimally or superficially understand a lot of things in different domains, different languages, different frameworks, whatever. Enough to be dangerous, usually, and that's kind of the problem with T-shaped people. So instead, what Kent Beck was saying is that why aren't we paint drip people? Meaning we specialize, we start a journey here, we start a journey there, and we sort of accumulate skills and knowledge over time. So it looks like paint dripping, down a wall. And if you approach team composition like this, then what you can do is you can take the profile of one paint drip, a person, you can overlay it onto the profile of another paint drip person, and then accumulate the skills until you've achieved sort of a critical mass of the competencies that you think that you actually need for that team to be successful. This is an excellent starting point for team composition. Now, how does this affect product managers? Because I started off talking about how we're not doing them any favors. Well, what I've seen in a lot of companies is that they have not taken or put a lot of thought into composition. Instead, what they do is they double down on the idea of 10x engineers. They don't exist. I heard somebody call them negative 10x engineers, meaning your ninja rock star is actually sapping the productivity of 10 other people in the team, which is probably usually the case in my experience. But a lot of companies are essentially looking for someone who is only a coder, which kind of makes sense, or does it? It may have made sense 20 years ago. Now, with things like ChatGPT, with sort of easily accessible information on how to solve problems, it's not as important anymore. And what you really want is a software developer who is broadening into those different competency areas, because that becomes important, especially in a highly collaborative, cooperative organization where teams do have to work with each other, where teams have to work within the team to accomplish solutions to problems that require an outcome greater than the sum of the parts. And this is incredibly important. Those companies, because they've leaned heavily into only needing developers with the technical skills and maybe minimally the delivery skills, have placed all of the burden of communication, leadership, and business acumen on product managers. Because obviously you do have to care about the business to be a product manager, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be incredibly good, for example, at leadership to be a product manager. But that's where we are now. And the worst thing about this is that you have this one person on the team who is essentially responsible for creating a roadmap, for sort of communicating your ability to deliver against that roadmap, for talking to customers, for working on the UX stuff, for communicating to the rest of the company about the deliveries and getting feedback and so on. This is actually a lot of work, and they get paid, I think, 10 to 20% less than software developers, and we ask very little of software developers in general. So how do we ease that burden? Well, I've already kind of described it, right? The burden is to demand a little bit more, some paint dripping from your software developers and other people within the team, so that the product manager is also able to really focus on their technical skills, which is analysis, talking to customers, and things like this. You will be better off for it if you do. So, yeah, we can be better. Just do it. Really care about your product manager. They work hard. And if I'm going to leave you a final thought, product managers should get paid the same as engineers. They should. Simple as that. All right. See you next time.